Hello and welcome back to Maggie May's channel. Um, as you know, I've been talking about my life story, um, my memoir, as to say, and my upbringing and the hard life that we would have back then and the hard life that I had back then. And there's many more people out there that haven't told their story, but I'm telling mine. And what I do is I'm just telling a story, each time. It just helps me, and it hopefully would help other people to understand their own upbringing and, the way you would have been made feel and what may have led you down a different path in life. Because as I've said in a previous video, that in a previous video that I do believe that we soak everything up from small children. When you're a small child, how do you know any difference? The only thing you know is, I smoke, guys. The only thing, you learn what you see, and that is the bottom line about it. You just learn what you see and you think that's normal. You don't know any difference. We were brought up in the countryside, so we didn't know any difference, because the only time I seen people would be at school and maybe some neighbours that lived up from us, you know. And as I spoke in my last video about the panic attacks that I was getting, that, my whole life were severe. And I kind of look back, think, where did they stem from? They stem from the upbringing, the fear, the discipline. Our discipline, to today's standards, would be a lot more severe back then. I learned to become quiet. I learned not to speak out because my mother had a favourite tree in the garden. It was called the Sally tree. And if someone was in trouble, if she wasn't happy, if someone, you were going to get it. And she would send one of the girls out, all depending which one was getting the whooping. The other one would have to go out and get the Sally. Now, these Sallys were like a horsewhip. We had a gate in the middle, and we had two piers, made of concrete at each side of the gate. A wall, and then another wall, and then a gate in the middle. And beside that, beside one of the walls, was this tall Sally tree. And that was her favourite tree. She would either go out and break off a Sally, which I said was like a horsewhip, long and bendy whip, whoosh. And would all, swing over and back, but that's why we called it a whip. All depending what the girls did, the golden child, I would say, didn't get much of it. The eldest one did. And to me, looking back now, I suppose whatever I knew about the whipping, the whooping, it wouldn't be serious. The crime wouldn't be serious enough to warrant that kind of beating. Because when the Sally would come in, whoever the eldest, she would get whooped and whooped and whooped, and you could see the lines across the backs of her legs. And I don't even think it's just wherever she'd get her, and that'd be it. Whack, whoop, whoosh, you know. And she'd be left crying. And but the thing was, my mother was in a temper when she did it, you know. She was full of rage and anger when she did it. So the whooping was hard, you know. And yeah, that was the Sally tree that I never liked, that has been stuck in my mind my whole life. I can forgive, but I'll never forget. That's my issue, is I will forgive you, but I won't forget if you did me wrong. That's just the type of a person that I am from my upbringing. I don't know, like I said, my grandmother lived next door when my grandfather was deceased. God rest his soul. And she had input into our house, into my mother's life and our life. However, she was ruling the roost, and she was very strict. You know, she was very strict, and I used to often hear the grandmother. What she'd say, like, "I'll take the switch to you." SWITCH. Now, a switch, you lived in the country, it was a stick that you break off a tree. But on the end of a switch, they would be notches, pieces, of thorns or bits. So if she said to you, "I take the switch to you," and she hit you with that, that means she'd say to you, "I will leave marks on you." And she would, like the time when she hit me with the saw knife, the bread knife, when I, as I said, put my hand across the table. She whacked me, and I didn't understand, I was only a little child. And she was famous for the switch. She took it to my eldest sister one morning we were to go to mass, and my mother was in hospital, and she was in the mental health hospital. And I'm not ashamed to say it. Why should I be? She was in the mental health hospital, and the grandmother was, supposed to be looking after us. But she, we were to go to mass, and my sister had a good suit, say, with a jacket and a skirt, and I remember it was blue, and it was something to do with sewing a button into the jacket of the suit. And the grandmother, of course, was Russian, wanting to be looked the part when she went down to the priory, is where we used to go to mass. So because my sister was a bit behind after sewing the button in the jacket, she got so angry, the grandmother. She didn't just get a switch, she got a stick, a thick, short stick. And then she started hitting my sister with it. Then my sister started running around the garden to try and get away from her. But the more she ran away from her, she got her and she whacked her with the stick. And it was a thick stick, you know. And I remember looking at that. I was thinking, like, I was terrified, you know. See, all that would have played into my panic attacks then later in life, being afraid to speak up. By God, I'm not afraid to speak up today. No, I'm not. And there's one thing I cannot stand is a bully. You know. But she had to wear the suit, the blue suit, I'll always remember it, and going down to Mass to keep up with the Joneses. And, back in our day in the 60s, Catholic religion, was a big thing. Um, it's why so many were against it. The treatment you would get from these so-called religious people that believed in God, but yet they didn't believe in the children and the treatment of the children. You had to go to Mass and that was it, and you had to wear a hat and that was it. And we wore the hats often going down on our own when our mother was at home. But the thing was, my mother and grandmother mostly didn't go to Mass. They would send us to Mass on our own down to the Priory, which was the Franciscan Brothers Priory, where they were the monks. That, I don't know, was something to do with the area we lived in from the mountain. And my grandfather would bring us to the church when I was little, God rest him. But yeah, it was about keeping up with the Joneses. It was about wanting to look right. And that still carries today, with a lot of people. It still carries on today that I see it in my own children. They're embarrassed to be themselves, and I don't like it. Get me sup of tea. And I don't like it because I don't like my children feeling that way, that they have to keep up with the Joneses in order to feel they're worth it, you know. We're all worth it, you know. That's just the way I see it. And the best stories you can tell is when you're older and elderly, because the young people today are only learning from what they see on the internet today. As that's not real life. The internet is not real life. Yeah, we make a video but that's a clip of our life. It's not all our life. I mean, you don't see me around here with the cleaning cloths and the, hoovering and trying to do a bit of gardening and come back in and do the house. Or there's days I'll get where I won't want to do anything. And I won't do anything. And I have issues with people in authority. I've had that for a long time because of experience, because of, like I said, when you're brought up poor, you have to put up with a lot, you know. So if you go to certain places, you already have it in your head. You're going to be put down, so you'll have the defense mode up. But I will say that the mental health services where I live are rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. Have you ever seen anyone cured from their mental health? They give them a prescription, give them pills, and they've got to figure it out. It's not a case that they have cured them. They never cure anyone. But plenty of innocent people have been locked away, in terrible, terrible conditions. And thank God, I wasn't, that didn't happen to me. But because I was intelligent enough, because I always studied, that was my thing. Um, I would do my own thing, but I always studied. And I would always, my whole life, I helped people. But I am now at that stage, I'll be 63 next month, that it's time for me. I'm not able to be helping people anymore. I've done it my whole life. And I'm, tired now. So the Sally tree was the thing, the famous tree. I don't know where she got that from. my mother. But she obviously got that from the grandmother, I'd say, because she was very fond of taking the switch, as she called it, breaking a stick and hitting you with something. Because I remember the golden child, those timber blocks. The golden child actually got hit one day with, and I couldn't believe this when she told me, because I wasn't there when it happened. She got hit with, the blocks that you cut for the fire, you chop the blocks, that she got hit with one of them because the mother was angry over something. So she got hit with one of them. And I did feel sorry for her, because that's, you don't do them things, that's violence. But I do have an issue with people in authority, because when I was brought up strict and I did everything right, I still suffered. No matter what I did right, I still suffered, about when my stepfather married my mother. He didn't want children. He didn't want children because he never had any children. And the thing about that was then we were a problem, weren't we? So I'll tell that in another story, what happened there when I was 15 years old. I was, 14 and a half when my mother remarried, and I was 15 then, maybe a little bit more, heading towards 16 when another thing happened. But as I said, the way I think now today is that there's a fly, the heat is still around, very hot, but not as bad, thank God, as it was. But I believed my mother got the habit of the salad tree and the weapons, and because she learned from her mother. As I said, my grandmother didn't love her grandchildren. We were just people who worked for her. And that was it. You toed the line. And if you didn't toe the line, you were going to get it. No matter what they'd have in their hands, it could be anything. It could be a shoe. It could be anything, it would be fired at you. And there was nobody to go to. As I said, back in them days, there was nobody you could go to tell. So, today, if that happens, they look for compensation, all these Catholic, where these mother and baby homes, they have to answer. But for us, nobody answered. Nobody was held accountable for our upbringing, the way we were treated, the conditions we lived in, and so on. So what do you say about that? That you soak everything up from being a young child, then you head into marriage, adult life. What have you learned? You've learned what you're being brought up in. Till my next video. Love you all, and I'll have another story for you. Mind yourselves, mind each other. Don't be trying to keep up with the Joneses, with these shopping addictions, with these gambling addictions, trying to get money. You're not going to take it with you when you go. So don't be so hard on yourselves. Don't be so hard on yourselves. You know, people, as I've said, to one of my children, if you're staring at somebody and you think that they're looking at you a certain way, they're probably thinking the same thing, you know, that you're looking at them, you know, and they're paranoid because they think, it works both ways. The way I've said to do it is, if you're out on the town, out in the street, and if you've a few things to do, mind your own business and keep going and be polite. If somebody looks at you and they just say hello and smile, you know, don't get into it. You know, conversations can lead to trouble. It's about the company that you keep. Okay, that's my little bit of advice at the end. See you in my next one.